It's funny. Uh, we all want to be smarter, right? But I think a lot of us realize that being smart isn't just about, like, knowing a bunch of facts.
Mm-hmm.
It's about making better decisions,
Mm.
avoiding those dumb mistakes we all make,
Right.
like just generally thinking more clearly and effectively.
Yeah.
You sent over some really interesting stuff about this,
Yeah.
and I'm excited to dive into it with you. I think it'll be useful for everyone.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people get hung up on the idea of like raw intelligence, like, oh, if only I had a higher IQ.
Right.
But it's really about how you use your brain, whatever your starting point is. I always think of it kind of like owning a really high performance sports car,
Okay.
but only ever driving it in first gear. Like, what's the point?
Right. You're not going to get very far like that. Exactly. And that's actually what this article I found really gets at.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Neuroscience Reveals 5 Secrets That Will Make You Smarter.
Okay.
And it starts off with this idea that even, like, super intelligent people can get tripped up by these things. It's called cognitive biases.
Oh, cognitive biases are fascinating. They really highlight the difference between like your cognitive ability, which is like your raw processing power, and then your cognitive style, which is how you actually apply that power in the real world.
Okay, so this article lays out 5 kind of secrets, or I guess you could say strategies, for thinking smarter.
Okay.
And they're not about, like,
Right.
memorizing more stuff, or doing brain teasers. They're really about changing how you think.
I like that. Yeah, very meta.
Yeah. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it.
All right, so secret number 1 is consider the opposite. Now, this sounds kind of zen, right?
It does, yeah.
But the idea is that to make better decisions, you should actually argue with yourself.
Oh, I love this one.
Stress test those assumptions.
Yeah. It's a direct attack on what's called my side bias, which is that very human tendency to, like, automatically favor our own perspective.
Right, like we're always, right.
Yeah. Like we're the defendant, the judge, and the jury, all in our own heads.
So this technique is about forcing yourself to play both sides.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you're facing a tough choice. The article suggests you think of it like a courtroom drama,
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be both the prosecutor and the defense attorney.
Yeah. And what's so cool about this, from a neuroscience perspective, is that when you do that, you're actually activating different neural pathways, which helps reduce the influence of those biases.
So it's like building a mental muscle.
Exactly. And the studies show that people who do this regularly, they make fewer reasoning errors, they're less overconfident, they just make better decisions overall.
Okay, this is going straight into my mental toolkit.
It's a good one.
All right, secret number 2 is use self-distancing. This one sounds kind of woo-woo, I'll be honest.
It does.
Just stick with me.
Okay.
Have you ever been watching, like, a horror movie?
Oh, yeah.
And you're just yelling at the character who's about to make a terrible decision?
Oh, all the time. Don't go in there.
Right. Don't split up. What are you doing?
Exactly.
So the idea here is that in that moment, you're not caught up in the character's, like, immediate fear and panic.
Right.
You're seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah.
So self-distancing is kind of like applying that to your own life.
I like that. Yeah, it's about getting some perspective on your own emotion.
So instead of being, like, totally immersed in the emotion, you step back a bit.
Mm-hmm. And what that does is it kind of dampens those like really hot reactive emotions and gives your prefrontal cortex, which is the more rational planning part of your brain, a chance to catch up.
So we're not suppressing the emotions.
Right.
We're just creating a little bit of distance.
Yeah. And there's some really interesting research on this. One study found that self-distancing actually improved communication and problem solving in couples who were having relationship problems.
Oh, okay. I did not see that coming.
Yeah. Like creating a little breathing room right in the middle of an emotional storm.
I like that. All right, this is good stuff. On to secret number 3. This one's a bit more technical sounding. It's use base rates.
Base rates. The unsung heroes of good decision making.
Okay.
They might not be the most exciting thing to talk about, but they're crucial.
Break it down for me.
So think about how we make decisions. We gather information, we weigh the pros and cons, but how often do we actually stop and think about how likely something is to happen?
Okay, so not just whether it could happen.
Right. Not just the possibility, but the probability.
Hmm.
So, for example, maybe you're thinking about buying a lottery ticket
Right.
because you heard about someone winning big. Well, the base rate of winning the Powerball jackpot
Yeah.
is about 1 in 292.2 million. You are
Yeah.
244 times more likely to get struck by lightning.
Okay, so it's about getting real with ourselves.
Exactly. Grounding our decisions in reality, not just our hopes and dreams.
Right, right. This is making me rethink a lot of things. Okay, ready for secret number 4.
Maybe.
Use emotional differentiation.
Okay.
So this one is all about becoming like fluent in the language of your own emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us have a pretty limited emotional vocabulary. It's like happy, sad, angry, stressed.
Right.
But imagine if you could distinguish between different shades of feeling, like
Oh, yeah.
a sommelier describing a fine wine.
That's a great analogy. So instead of just saying, I'm stressed, you might say,
Well-
I'm feeling overwhelmed, and there's a bit of anxiety mixed in there about this deadline.
Exactly. And this article actually mentioned a neuroscientist who initially mistook flu symptoms for feelings of love.
Oh, wow.
So our gut feelings aren't always accurate.
Right,
We
yeah.
need to get more precise.
Yeah. And the research suggests that people who are good at emotional differentiation, they tend to make better decisions,
Got it.
have healthier relationships. They're just generally better at managing their emotional lives.
Okay, I am definitely going to have to work on my emotional vocabulary.
Me too.
All right, ready for the final secret. This one might sound a little counterintuitive.
I am intrigued.
It's called embrace ambiguity.
Okay.
And it's all about getting comfortable with not knowing all the answers.
Now, this is interesting, because you would think that getting smarter is all about,
Right. Having the answers, knowing stuff.
yeah, figuring things out.
So this article talks about a study where they taught students a method for solving math problems.
Okay.
Some of the students were told, this is the way to solve it. Others were told, this is one way to solve it.
Okay.
And the ones who were told it was just one way actually performed better.
Interesting.
So having a little bit of uncertainty actually helped them be more flexible.
Yeah, because when we think there's only one right answer, it's like our brains shut down, we stop exploring.
think we're done.
Yeah, exactly. But when we embrace ambiguity, we stay curious.
Okay.
We keep searching, we're more open to new information.
So it's not about giving up on finding answers. It's just about
Uh.
recognizing that certainty can sometimes be an illusion.
I love that. Yeah. The world is a complex place.
It is.
There are rarely simple answers,
Right.
and sometimes clinging to certainty can actually hold us back.
This is really making me think. All right, so we've got these 5 secrets or strategies,
Yeah.
and they all kind of tie together in this idea of becoming more flexible, more adaptable thinkers.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that intelligence isn't just about what you know,
Right.
but how you think.
Okay, so how do we actually start to put these ideas into practice?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest hurdles is just awareness. A lot of people aren't even aware of how much their thinking is shaped by these unconscious biases.
It's like we don't know what we don't know.
Exactly. So step 1 is just becoming more mindful of how our minds work, paying attention to those patterns of thought, those knee-jerk reactions, those assumptions we make without even realizing it.
Right. But even when we are aware of those biases, it can still be really hard to overcome them, right? I mean, they're so ingrained in our thinking.
Oh, absolutely. It takes effort. It takes practice. Think about it like learning to play a musical instrument. At first, it's awkward. It's frustrating.
Right.
But with consistent practice, it becomes more natural, more fluid.
So we need to approach this like building mental muscles. We got to exercise those critical thinking skills regularly if we want to see results.
Precisely. And one of the best ways to do that is to actively seek out perspectives that challenge our own. We need to get comfortable being wrong sometimes.
That's consider the opposite idea in action. Right?
Yeah.
But honestly, that can be so uncomfortable. Our brains are wired to seek out information that confirms what we already believe.
Oh, I know. It goes against our natural inclinations, but that's where the growth happens, right? That's how we break out of those echo chambers and expand our understanding.
It's like the difference between staying in your comfort zone versus venturing out into uncharted territory. The comfort zone is cozy and familiar, but the real adventure lies beyond its borders.
I love that. And I think that sense of adventure is essential for becoming a more sophisticated thinker.
We also talked about using base rates to make more rational decisions. But isn't it hard to do that in the real world where we're constantly bombarded with emotional appeals and anecdotal evidence?
It's definitely a challenge. Our brains are wired to be swayed by stories and emotions. It's what makes us human. But we can't let those stories and emotions completely override our rational judgment.
It's like that saying, the plural of anecdote is not data. Just because we hear a few compelling stories doesn't mean it reflects the broader reality.
Exactly. We need to train ourselves to look for the data, the statistical probabilities, the evidence-based conclusions.
But sometimes those statistics can feel so abstract and impersonal. How do we make them feel more relevant to our own lives?
I think it's about finding ways to connect those abstract concepts to concrete examples that we can relate to. For example, let's say you're considering investing in a hot new tech stock that everyone seems to be talking about. You're feeling excited, maybe even a little bit FOMO.
Oh, I've been there.
Instead of just going with your gut feeling, take a step back and ask yourself, what's the base rate of success for startups in this particular industry? Research shows that over 90% of startups fail within the first 5 years.
Wow, that's a sobering statistic. It suddenly makes that sure thing investment feel a lot riskier.
Exactly. It's not about eliminating emotions from the decision-making process. It's about finding that balance between our intuition and our rational minds.
This makes me think about the emotional differentiation idea as well. Knowing how to accurately label our emotions can help us make better decisions, especially when the stakes are high.
Absolutely. It's like having a more precise vocabulary for understanding our internal states. If we can distinguish between fear and excitement, for example, we can make more informed choices about whether to take a risk or play it safe.
It's like having a finer-tuned instrument for reading our own emotional compass.
Exactly. And the more we practice this emotional literacy, the better we'll become at navigating those complex inner landscapes.
Okay, this is all starting to feel really practical and actionable. But what about embracing ambiguity? It still feels a bit paradoxical to me. I mean, we're talking about getting smarter, but then we're saying it's okay to not have all the answers.
It's not about giving up on the pursuit of knowledge. It's about recognizing that the world is a complex and ever-changing place, and that certainty is often an illusion.
So it's more about having a mindset of curiosity and open-mindedness rather than trying to force everything into neat, predictable boxes.
That's a great way to put it. Think about some of the greatest discoveries and innovations throughout history. They often came from people who were willing to question the status quo, to explore the unknown, to embrace the possibility that they might be wrong.
So it's like that saying, the only constant is change. If we want to thrive in this rapidly changing world, we need to become more comfortable with uncertainty.
Absolutely. The more we can embrace ambiguity, the more adaptable and resilient we'll become.
It's like the difference between a rigid, inflexible structure that crumbles under pressure versus a flexible, adaptable system that bends with the wind.
That's a fantastic analogy, and it highlights the importance of cultivating a growth mindset, where we see challenges and uncertainties as opportunities for learning and development.
This is all making me think about how we define intelligence in the first place. Maybe it's not just about having a high IQ or knowing a lot of facts. Maybe it's more about having the mental flexibility and adaptability to navigate an increasingly complex world.
I couldn't agree more. In a world that's constantly changing, the ability to learn, adapt, and unlearn might be the most valuable intelligence of all.
And that's something that we can all cultivate, regardless of our starting point.
Exactly. These secrets are really just tools for unlocking our cognitive potential. It's about becoming more aware of our thinking patterns, challenging our assumptions, and embracing the discomfort of growth.
You know, this whole conversation has really shifted my perspective on what it means to be smart. It's not about having all the answers. It's about having the humility to admit what we don't know and the curiosity to keep exploring.
I love that. It's about embracing that lifelong journey of learning and growth.
And that's a journey that we can all embark on, regardless of our age, background, or current level of knowledge.
Absolutely. These strategies are for everyone.
So we're talking about getting smarter, but it seems like a lot of it comes down to unlearning some of our bad habits, those mental shortcuts that lead us astray.
It's true. A lot of those shortcuts were probably helpful at some point, back when we were living in caves and had to make snap judgments to survive.
Right, like, is that a saber-toothed tiger or just a funny-looking bush? Better run just in case.
Exactly. But in today's world, those same instincts can trip us up. We're bombarded with information, we're under constant pressure, and those old shortcuts don't always serve us well.
So how do we start to rewire our brains, to break free from those outdated patterns?
Well, awareness is key, like we were saying earlier. Just noticing when those biases are kicking in, like, are you getting defensive in a conversation? Are you jumping to conclusions? Are you cherry-picking evidence to support your existing beliefs?
Okay, so once we catch ourselves doing that, What's the next step?
Well, that's where those secrets come in. They're like tools for overriding those automatic responses.
Like, if you find yourself getting sucked into a heated argument online, you could consider the opposite approach.
Exactly. Force yourself to see the other side of the argument. Even if it feels uncomfortable at first, you might be surprised at what you learn.
Right. It's like that saying, you can't understand someone until you've walked a mile in their shoes. Except in this case, it's like walking a mile in their mental shoes.
I like that. And it doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but it can help you see where they're coming from, which can lead to more productive conversations.
This reminds me of something we talked about earlier, about how technology can be both a blessing and a curse when it comes to our thinking.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, on the one hand, we have access to more information than ever before. We can learn about anything, connect with anyone, explore any topic that piques our interest.
It's like having the entire world's knowledge at our fingertips.
Exactly. But on the other hand, that same abundance of information can also lead to overwhelm, distraction, and even a decline in our critical thinking skills.
It's like we're drowning in information, but we're thirsty for wisdom.
That's a great way to put it. And that's where those secrets to smarter thinking become even more crucial. We need to develop those mental filters, those critical thinking skills, that ability to discern between reliable information and misinformation.
So it's not just about consuming more information, it's about consuming it more consciously and critically.
Exactly. We need to be more intentional about what we choose to consume, how we process it, and how we integrate it into our existing knowledge base.
This makes me think about consider the opposite strategy again. We need to be willing to question the information we encounter online, even if it comes from sources we trust.
Absolutely. We need to be skeptical, not cynical. It's about asking questions, seeking out diverse perspectives, and being willing to change our minds when presented with new evidence.
It's like being a detective, always looking for clues and piecing together the bigger picture.
I love that analogy. We need to become more active participants in the information landscape, not just passive consumers.
And that takes effort. It's easier to just scroll mindlessly through our social media feeds or passively absorb whatever pops up on our screens.
It's definitely easier, but it's not necessarily making us smarter. We need to be more deliberate about how we engage with technology if we want to use it as a tool for cognitive enhancement.
This makes me think about the use-based rates strategy as well. In the online world, it's easy to get caught up in the hype surrounding certain trends or ideas.
Oh, absolutely. We see this all the time with social media algorithms, which tend to amplify content that generates strong emotional responses.
Right, it's like those clickbait headlines that are designed to trigger our outrage or fear, regardless of whether the information is accurate or balanced.
Exactly. But if we can train ourselves to step back and consider the base rates, to look for the broader context and the statistical probabilities, we can make more informed decisions about what to believe and how to act.
So instead of just reacting emotionally to every headline or social media post, we need to pause and ask ourselves, how likely is this to be true? What's the broader context here? What are the potential biases at play?
Those are great questions to ask. It's about developing that critical thinking muscle that allows us to filter out the noise and find the signal.
This is all making me feel more empowered, honestly. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the constant influx of information, but if we can develop these mental tools, we can actually use technology to our advantage.
I couldn't agree more. It's about reclaiming our agency as consumers of information and becoming more mindful, intentional, and discerning in our digital interactions.
You know, as we're talking about all of this, I'm realizing that these secrets to smarter thinking aren't just about becoming more intelligent in the traditional sense. They're also about becoming more emotionally intelligent, more resilient, more adaptable to the challenges of a rapidly changing world.
That's such a brilliant insight. These strategies are really about cultivating a holistic approach to intelligence, one that encompasses not just our cognitive abilities, but also our emotional intelligence, our social skills, our ability to navigate complexity and ambiguity.
It's like we're talking about a new definition of intelligence, one that's more relevant to the 21st century.
I love that. It's about moving beyond those traditional measures of intelligence and embracing a more nuanced, multifaceted understanding of what it means to be smart in today's world.
And that's incredibly empowering because it means that we can all continue to grow and develop our intelligence throughout our lives.
Absolutely. There's no finish line in this journey. It's about embracing that lifelong pursuit of knowledge, growth, and self-discovery.
And those are pursuits that are open to everyone, regardless of their age, background, or current level of knowledge.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about democratizing access to knowledge and empowering everyone to become more thoughtful, insightful, and engaged citizens of the world.
This whole conversation about using our brains better has gotten me thinking about how we learn in the first place.
Oh, yeah. Learning, that's a whole other can of worms, isn't it?
It is. But I think a lot of the things we've been talking about apply to learning as well, like being open to new information, challenging our assumptions, embracing ambiguity.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest obstacles to learning is that fear of being wrong. We're so conditioned to think that making mistakes is a bad thing.
Right, like we're supposed to have all the answers all the time.
But in reality, making mistakes is essential for learning. It's how we figure out what works and what doesn't. It's how we grow and evolve.
So how do we create I guess you could say, mistake-friendly environment for ourselves and others?
Well, I think it starts with shifting our mindset. We need to see mistakes not as failures, but as opportunities for learning. Like scientists conducting experiments.
Right, they don't expect every experiment to be a success.
Exactly. They know that failure is part of the process. It's how they refine their hypotheses and get closer to the truth.
So maybe we need to approach learning with that same kind of scientific mindset. Be curious, experiment, iterate, and don't be afraid to fail along the way.
I love that. And I think it's important to create a culture of psychological safety, where people feel comfortable taking risks, asking questions, admitting when they don't know something.
Because if everyone's afraid to make a mistake, then no one's really learning, right?
Exactly. We need to create spaces where people feel safe to stumble, to get things wrong, to learn from those experiences.
This makes me think about the embrace ambiguity idea. When we're learning something new, it's natural to feel uncertain, to have a lot of questions.
Absolutely. And I think that's where a good teacher, mentor, or coach can be invaluable. Someone who can guide us through those uncertain moments, who can help us connect the dots, who can provide that scaffolding for our learning.
Right. It's like having a map and a compass when you're exploring new territory.
That's a great analogy. And I think technology can play a role here as well. There are so many online resources, courses, communities that can support our learning.
Yeah, it's like having a whole library at our disposal,
Well,
plus the ability to connect with experts and other learners from all over the world.
exactly. But again, it comes back to being intentional about how we use those resources. It's not just about passively consuming information. It's about actively engaging with it, asking questions, applying what we learn, seeking feedback, and iterating.
So it's like that active learning approach that we were talking about earlier. It's about making those connections, drawing those inferences, putting those ideas into practice.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And I think the more we can embrace that active learning mindset, the more fulfilling and rewarding our learning journey will be.
All of this makes me wonder if there are any specific techniques or strategies that people can use to improve their learning abilities. Is it possible to, train your brain to learn more effectively?
That's a great question, and there's actually a lot of research being done in this area. One promising area is called neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to change and adapt throughout our lives.
So our brains aren't just fixed, they're constantly evolving.
Exactly. And there are certain activities and practices that can promote neuroplasticity and enhance our learning abilities. For example, things like meditation, exercise, learning a new language, playing a musical instrument, even just challenging yourself with new experiences.
So it's like we can create a more fertile environment for our brains to grow and adapt.
I like that analogy. And there are also specific learning techniques like spaced repetition and retrieval practice that have been shown to improve memory and retention.
We could probably do a whole other deep dive on learning strategies sometime.
Oh, absolutely. It's a fascinating and ever-evolving field. But for now, I think the key takeaway is that learning is a lifelong journey, and there are always new things we can discover about ourselves and the world around us.
We've spent a good chunk of time talking about these secrets to smarter thinking, but I think it'd be helpful to see how they actually work, like in the real world.
Yeah, good point. Let's get a little more concrete.
Okay, so let's start with that whole consider the opposite idea. I was thinking how useful this would be in, say, a business setting.
Oh, yeah. Tons of applications there.
Like imagine a team of executives trying to decide whether to acquire another company.
Okay, yeah.
Everyone's excited, projecting huge growth.
Mm-hmm. Easy to get swept up in that.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's when consider the opposite becomes super important. They need to force themselves to play devil's advocate.
Absolutely.
So they might ask, what if this integration is way more complicated than we think? What are we missing? What if the company cultures clash?
Exactly. Think
Yeah.
of it as a pre-mortem for the deal. You're trying to spot the potential problems before they happen.
Yeah, smart. So you're not just blindly optimistic.
Right, you're doing a more balanced risk assessment.
Okay, and this doesn't just apply to, like, big business decisions, right?
Oh, no, not at all.
Think about relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Say your partner forgets your anniversary.
Ouch.
It's so easy to feel hurt, to jump to conclusions.
Yeah, they don't care, that sort of thing.
Right. But if you pause and consider the opposite, maybe they're super stressed at work or there's a family issue they haven't told you about.
You're not dismissing your own feelings, but you're creating space for other possibilities.
Exactly. It changes how you approach the whole situation.
Right, communication is key.
Okay, let's shift gears to use self-distancing. I love this one. It's like having a superpower.
It does feel that way, right?
The article mentioned this study where self-distancing actually helped people with public speaking.
I remember that one. It's amazing because so many people are terrified of public speaking.
I know, I get it.
But when they practiced self-distancing, they were less anxious and actually gave better presentations.
So it's like you're not so caught up in that feeling of everyone's staring at me, I'm going to mess this up.
It's like you're watching yourself give the presentation, from a third-person perspective.
Oh, I see. You're still there.
Yeah, you're more detached.
I bet this would be so helpful for athletes, too.
Oh, totally. Think about a basketball player about to take the game-winning shot.
Yeah, the pressure's on.
If they can use self-distancing to create that mental space, they can get into that flow state, where they're just performing at their peak.
They're not choking under pressure.
Exactly. It's a balance. They're still aware of the stakes, but they're not letting the emotions take over.
All right, let's talk about use base rates for a minute.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about how important this is when it comes to, like, investing.
Oh, yeah. Investing is a perfect example. So many people get seduced by those stories of, like, overnight riches.
The stock is going to go through the roof.
Right. But base rates remind us to be realistic.
Yeah, like, remember that for every rags to riches story, there are probably thousands of people who lost their shirts.
Exactly. So base rates force you to ask, okay, what's the actual track record for this kind of investment?
So you're not just following the hype, you're looking at the data.
Right. And that same principle applies to so many things, from your health to your career to basically any big decision where you need to cut through the noise.
It makes me think about all the health advice we're bombarded with.
Oh my gosh, yes.
New diets, miracle supplements, the latest trends. It's hard to know what to believe.
Right, but base rates can help you sort through all that. You can ask, what does the actual scientific evidence say?
Okay, that makes sense. What about use emotional differentiation? I feel like this is a big one for, like, creative types.
Absolutely. Creative work is so emotional, right?
It's a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Those highs of inspiration, but also the lows of self-doubt.
Totally. But emotional differentiation gives you a way to handle all that, those ups and downs.
So instead of just feeling, like, bad,
Yeah.
a writer might say, okay, am I feeling blocked, uninspired, or just plain burnt out?
Yeah.
And those are all different.
Exactly. It's like having a more precise language for your emotions so you can respond in a more targeted way.
I think this applies to parenting too, right?
Oh, big time. Parenting is full of intense emotions.
You're constantly dealing with joy, frustration, worry, exhaustion, all of it.
And if you can differentiate between those emotions, you can be a more effective parent. You're not just reacting to everything.
Right, you're more intentional.
Exactly.
Okay, last but not least, let's revisit embrace ambiguity. This one feels especially tough these days when everyone wants certainty.
Oh, yeah. Our brains are wired to crave those simple answers.
But like you said, the world is messy.
It really is. So embracing ambiguity isn't about giving up. It's about changing how we think about uncertainty.
So instead of seeing it as a threat, we see it as, I don't know, maybe an opportunity.
That's it. It's about being curious, open-minded. Like the journey itself might be more valuable than any fixed destination.
I like that. It's about being adaptable.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, are you going to cling to a rigid plan, or are you going to flow with the changes?
This is making me think we need a whole new definition of intelligence.
Yeah, it's not just about having a lot of knowledge.
Right, it's about being able to navigate a world that's always in flux.
Exactly. Being comfortable not knowing everything, always challenging your own assumptions.
Wow, this has been such a mind-expanding conversation.
It really has. I'm glad we had this chance to explore these ideas.
Me too. It feels like we went beyond just getting smarter and got into some really deep stuff about being human.
I like that. Yeah, it's about being curious, engaged, constantly learning and growing.
Well said. And on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into smarter thinking. We'll be back soon with more thought-provoking conversations.
Looking forward to it.
Until then, keep those minds sharp and stay curious out there.
See you next time.